Opinion, Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sundays from 6 p.m. The Neil Oliver Show.
It's absolutely vital that people are given the opportunity to take part in the debate, to say the things that matter to them, to be challenged. A country is only really a shared dream. As long as enough people have a shared idea of what it is, then that country exists. What GB News does is give voices somewhere they can be heard.
The Neil Oliver Show. Sundays from 6 p.m. on GB News.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. As we hurtle towards the spring equinox and look forward towards longer days, let us illuminate your noontide with flashes of arts, culture, politics and world affairs. Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party can perceive no light at the end of the tunnel, yet are headed for a train wreck. The newspapers report that the Prime Minister's authority is ebbing away, and it is suggested that Penny Mordaunt should replace him. Having lost the former Deputy Party Chairman to the Reform Party, with ever more senior members of Parliament standing down at the election, as some polls put the Tories almost 30 points behind Labour, could any event short of an asteroid reverse the government's fortunes? With 2 tax cuts in the last 6 months, falling inflation and energy prices, reduced crossings of the English Channel, why does Sunak receive no credit? An excellent political panel will discuss all that. One incumbent does not fear defeat. Voters in Russia have been variously coaxed, cajoled and coerced into the polling stations since Friday, with reports that in occupied Ukraine ballot papers are being collected at the point of a gun. The re-election of Vladimir Putin is beyond doubt. With Alexei Navalny eliminated, can the Russian opposition expose the illegitimacy of his rule? Will the sham elections embolden Putin in his illegal invasion of Ukraine? Speaking of disputed borders, this year England lost a tireless campaigner for the restoration of the historic counties, which have been mangled by reforms. Pam Morehouse was unflagging in her efforts to have the counties recognised, at least in ceremonial form, eventually enlisting scores of members of Parliament into her campaign. Another woman who the years could not condemn was unearthed, literally, close to the historic Burghley House in a remarkable stroke of luck. A Roman marble head was disinterred by a mechanical digger. The sculpture was probably the prized possession of the 9th Earl of Exeter, a noted grand tourist who loved Italy, but how did it end up buried 300 yards away from the house? Before that mystery and all the rest, here are your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Michael, thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Senior Tories have attempted to downplay claims of a Conservative plot to replace Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister with Penny Mordaunt. Reports in the Mail and the Telegraph say MPs on the right of the party would like Ms Mordaunt to lead them into the next election in an effort to avoid, quote, catastrophic losses in the polls. Former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg denounced the idea as madness. The move would mean a fourth leader of the party in just 5 years. Former Conservative Party leader Serene Duncan-Smith told GB News' Camilla Tominey the main focus should be on the election and not on Tory infighting.
We've got to stop turning inwards on ourselves and start trying to get behind the idea that we've got an election to fight. And the public wants to know that we're both united and we're very clear. Those points I said earlier on about how to get the Labour Party into an argument that you can then kill them over in terms of the way that you take the debate is really critical, and dynamic politics demands it. What dynamic politics does not demand is literally the sort of third leader in a short space of time that replaced Boris Johnson.
Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth told GB News the government's priorities are all wrong.
Rishi Sunak is not acting in the national interest. It's reckless, it's irresponsible. He should name the date of a general election and stabilise matters. At the moment, he's more preoccupied with his own leadership and saving his own skin than governing in the national interest. And I think after 14 years, this is a pretty discredited government. He needs to name the date. I mean, but if he doesn't name the date soon, we could have a leadership election soon.
The Defence Ministry of Defence says Grant Shapps was forced to abandon a trip to southern Ukraine last week for security reasons. British intelligence warned of a credible missile threat from Russia, saying the Kremlin had got wind of his visit. That's according to the Sunday Times. Mr Shapps was due to travel to Odessa a day after a missile hit the city, while the Ukrainian president and the Greek Prime Minister were visiting there. 5 people were killed in the explosions, according to Ukrainian authorities. Meanwhile, the Latvian Prime Minister has told the Sunday Telegraph that Britain should consider conscription and a total defence model to deter Russian aggression. Latvia reintroduced the model last year, with all able-bodied men required to complete 11 months of military service. However, in January, the UK Armed Forces Minister James Heappey said any talk of the UK introducing conscription to the army if NATO goes to war with Russia was nonsense. Well, that as Russians are casting their ballots on the final day of voting for the country's next president. Vladimir Putin, who's been in power since 1999, is expected to win another 6-year term with a landslide victory. The election comes just over 2 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The first 2 days of the vote saw dozens of incidents of vandalism at polling stations, with several people detained across Russia. Former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations, Steve Gill, told GB News the locals see no other option but to keep Putin in power.
Voters are telling them that they are voting not just because they think that it's a close race, but because they want to send a message that they support Putin. And there's a lot of reasons to. They have 2.6% GDP. They have 7% inflation. It was 1,500% when he first took office. And, they're happy with where the economy is. They're happy with his leadership. And one of the voters told me today that by voting, even though they think he's going to win handily, it's like shaking his hand and saying thank you.
Councils will have to consider whether residents support low-traffic neighbourhoods in their areas before going ahead with the schemes. The draft guidance is due to come into force this summer. They're designed to encourage cycling and walking by limiting driving in side roads and include wider pavements and barriers to restrict vehicles. LTNs often use signs and bollards to prevent traffic being able to drive along a certain route. As well as local residents, businesses and emergency services will also need to approve of the move. And finally, a volcano in Iceland has erupted for a 4th time in just 3 months. Previous eruptions destroyed roads and forced a town to evacuate. If you're watching us on television, you'll be able to see fountains of molten rock soaring into the night sky from fissures in the ground. Authorities had warned for weeks that an eruption was imminent just south of Iceland's capital, Reykjavik. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Michael Portillo.
Thank you, Tatiana Sanchez. The Labour Party talked up the prospect of a general election in May, suggesting that it is confident that it would win a snap poll. Well, it's hard to disagree. People Polling, which often carries out polls for GB News, has this week put Labour a devastating 28 points ahead of the Conservatives. Why does Rishi Sunak receive no credit for progress? In the last 6 months, we've seen 2 tax cuts, falling energy prices and inflation, and reduced illegal crossings of the English Channel. Is there any event or development, a deus ex machina, that could alter Tory fortunes? To answer that, I have with me Madeline Grant from The Telegraph, Henry Hill, who is Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, and Ivor Kaplan, who was a Defence Minister under Tony Blair. Welcome, all of you, to GB News. Welcome back, in every case. Madeline, first of all, just give us an idea of the mood of the Conservative Party in Parliament. What's going on there?
It's pretty grim at the moment. I think that although there is a sense of, in some cases, outright rebellion, like maybe now we should see if we can do any better taking our chances by switching leaders, I'd say across the board, it's a real sense of, I don't know, kind of hopelessness. You know, you have to keep turning up and making the case for the government if you're on the airwaves, etc. But it's increasingly difficult for them to do that. And of course, all around them, they see more and more colleagues putting their heads above the parapet and saying, I'm not going to rerun in the next general election, which adds to this kind of sense of doom and decay. But it's never quite, I don't think it's got to the point where it's bad enough that people are thinking, oh, let's, you know, take a gamble on another Prime Minister, but things just kind of chug along, getting worse and worse gradually.
Tim Shipman in the Sunday Times refers to the Prime Minister's authority ebbing away, which raises an interesting point. If they're going to remain in office, let's say, until December, which is a distinct possibility, I mean, how will that be possible if the authority continues to ebb at its present rate?
I don't know how, I think they will have to start taking on board the concerns of backbenchers and being a bit better at communicating with them. Because when you're having to rely on your MPs and ministers to go out and bat for you on a regular basis. And, you know, the attack lines write themselves. There's great disappointment about the way that the Frank Hester debacle was handled by Number 10. It wasn't just the remarks themselves, but the handling of it and the fact that so many people were made to look silly by having to go out and defend the line that was ever changing. So I really think they have to improve their relations with MPs because the mood is sort of becoming ever more conspiratorial.
There's a marvellous anecdote the other day of a backbencher going to the Prime Minister and saying, I don't know what your vision is. And he said, well, the vision is very clear, talk to my staff. Which I thought was a brilliant summary of where we stand. Henry, moving towards the sort of main question, is there anything that could make life better for the Tories?
Labour screwing up. If you think about, when was the last time that a party threw away a 25-point lead in the polls? It was 2017, when Theresa May thought, OK, I've got this big lead, I'm going to use it to do something worthwhile, and I'm going to ask asset-rich older people to pay for some of their own social care, almost through the election. Now, I don't think Labour's going to be silly enough politically to do that. So the problem the government has is that, you talked about some of the tax cuts and everything else, but the tax cuts are largely illusory, right? Like, thanks to fiscal drag, tax is going up. And I think we've hit the point where the political economy of this country really just kind of visibly doesn't work, right? Like the public we've got a toxic combination of very high taxes and public services are under strain. And we have very high immigration, but it's not delivering GDP per capita economic growth. And there is very little that the government can do about that after 14 years, because at this point, if you're the Prime Minister, and I know that Rishi only came in a couple of years ago, but if you deliver a damning speech about law and order or immigration, it is necessarily an implicit critique of your own government's record. Now, I don't think Labour have many answers on most of this stuff either, and I think that they're going to have a terrible time in government, but no, and short of maybe Argentina invading the Falklands again, but even then, could we get the ships there these days? I don't know if we could.
No, I can guarantee we could. Ian Duncan Smith today was saying to Camilla that it's different from 1997 because it turns out there are vast numbers of people who have not yet made up their mind how to vote, whereas in 1997 they were saying, we're really looking forward to Tony Blair. Henry, is there anything in that distinction, do you think?
I mean, look, maybe at the margins it's possible that the election will be closer than the current polls suggest. You know, if some don't knows break towards the Conservatives for whatever reason, if Jeremy Hunt has another fiscal event where he really micro-targets the kind of policies I think that could make a difference are things like the child benefit clawback that we had at the budget, because that was a really targeted intervention and the families that benefit will really feel it. Whereas a big thing like the NI cut, it's too diffuse. I don't think voters will notice. So you can claw it back at the margins. But in terms of winning the election from here, no, I don't see how that's possible.
Ivor, do you want to talk about the comparison with 1997? I mean, one thing that strikes me, because, you know, I was very much part of events in 1997, and we were a very divided party. But we continued, I don't think this is just my fantasy, I think we continued quite to like each other. I mean, I rather like Michael Huston, I rather like Ken Clarke, even though, you know, we were on opposite sides of many of the arguments, whereas the Tories at the moment really seem to detest each other. On the other hand, as we just alluded to, Keir Starmer is not Tony Blair at this point. No. Do you want to comment on the comparisons with 97?
Well, firstly, Michael, I've said constantly that Keir isn't Tony Blair, and, you know, I think that's a fair point to say. In the same way that elections are different. Every election is different, as we know. And I have been saying to people all around the southeast and southwest when I'm out and about doing various things that people who are on boards have to do for the Labour Party, you know, it's actually about understanding that there's still work to do. You know, no one's cast a single vote yet on a general election, even though the polls are polling at that level of 27, 28 points, as Henry just said. You know, so it looks good, but not a single vote has been cast. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think Keir will be a good Prime Minister. And, you know, I look forward to that. But at the same time, it's not going to be the same as what happened in 1997. I think it will be different, both in government, with a different economic situation than the one we inherited in 1997. So I think there's all those sort of things that have got to come to it. And I think the other one is that everyone likes to know what Labour stands for and what Labour wants to do in government. But an old friend of yours, now Lord Hague, he once said to me, it's the one thing that the opposition should never do, is to actually give away all their best ideas. Some might say that non-doms has just been one of those issues.
But you could also have a terrible accident with a new idea, as Henry said. Yeah. I think, Ivor, increasingly it strikes me that the fact that Starmer is not Blair is not going to make much difference to the general election result after all. What it may make a difference to is what it's like to be in government, because the Blair government got off with such a rocket boost, didn't it? You remember the scenes of Blair going up the street in Downing Street. You can't imagine Starmer being received in quite the same way. Yeah, I can't imagine, you know, things can only get better being played when Starmer arrives.
So we still use that when we can.
Do.
Yeah. They like getting drunk and dancing to it at conference too.
It's not a tune that I particularly enjoy because of the time at which it was played. But do you take that point? It might mainly affect the beginning of the government.
I think that will happen. I don't think we can expect that big, you know, what happened in 97 coming again. I think it will be very much, business as usual. That will be, I think, the area that Keir will want to go through. He knows this is going to be difficult in terms of the economic situation, and that the government, our Labour government, has got to actually be able to do that.
Yeah. Madeleine, we better address the question of whether the Conservatives would do better with a new leader.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that fundamentally, if you look at the polls over the last year and a bit, although I think journalists often get rather sort of preoccupied with some slight shift from day to day, if you look at the general picture, it's pretty much been, you know, equally bad post-Truss onwards. And I think that there is this debate about what is actually in Rishi Sunak's gift to achieve. But I think a lot of the damage was simply inflicted there and then by forever torpedoing the Conservative reputation for sound money and economic competence. I mean, once that's gone, it's very hard to revive it. So I think that in some ways, changing leader would not address that problem. And of course, everyone comes back to the point about 14 years. It's a delivery question. It's more, I think, what they need to do is to, try to regroup if they possibly can, stop being quite so hostile to each other, as you were saying, and maybe try and look for tangible things that they could point to when we come round to the next general election.
Henry, would things be very different if Boris Johnson had been a bit braver and fought his seat at a by-election and held it? Uxbridge was held. I mean, if he were a member of Parliament now, things would feel a bit different because there would be a real alternative. I mean, someone who was a proven election winner. But, Penny Mordaunt and all these others, there's no particular reason to think that they're better than Rishi.
No, Rishi currently has sort of the ultimate job security, which is he has a job that nobody wants. All of the people who want to be Tory leaders seriously want to take over after the election, because otherwise all that happens if you take over now is that you are the face on the Wikipedia entry for the catastrophic 2024 general election result. It would be different if Boris was there. It would be, because currently the plotters are still talking about trying to bring Boris back, despite the fact that he's not in Parliament, and Rishi Sunak is the man who decides if he gets to be a candidate. So if he had fought and won, I think that would have changed the narrative around Boris, because he'd have won that by-election. I think that would have expunged a lot of the accumulated sort of negative reputation. And his supporters it'd be more like trying to call Charles II back from France than Arthur from Avalon, right? Like, it would be a completely different operation. But he's not there, and nobody serious wants to take over now. The mechanics would be hideous, and there would be critical pressure for an immediate general election. So I think that there's no chance of it happening.
Ivor, Tony Blair was famously pessimistic about his own chance of winning. Apparently on election day he was asking, whether there was a way back to the bar for him because he thought he wasn't going to win. Do you think Starmer also keeps in reserve some caution, just in case this doesn't work out?
Well, just one little bit about what happened in '97. At 2 o'clock in the morning was my result. And that's the point when Tony says to Alistair, I think we've won now. And he's obviously up in Sedgefield and I'm down on the south coast doing something else. So I think that was how he played it. He all along wanted to keep very calm about the elections. And I think Keir is following that kind of approach. And I think it's the right thing to do. It's this whole thing about the polls are really interesting, but they're only interesting now because of where it is and big polls. But ultimately, you've got to get the votes right to actually win elections around, places like Sussex, places like Oxford, places in the north of England where we didn't win in 2019.
I would like Keir Starmer to hold a rally in Sheffield. Neil
We're all right.
We're all right.
That definitely doesn't happen anymore.
That's not going to happen, is it? Thank you very much, Henry Hill, Ivor Captain and Madeline Grant. After the break, we turn to another election, one where the incumbent has no fear of losing. In Russia, although there's no prospect of Vladimir Putin being ousted, could the poll nonetheless be significant? Stay with us, please.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
Welcome back to Headliners. And Paul, we're going to get straight into Monday's mail for some good old-fashioned, traditional male breastfeeding.
Yeah. To answer the question, what is the latest woke hell, Josh? Row as hospitals say hormone-filled milk from trans women who were born male is just as good for a baby as the real thing. It's possible for men, if they pump themselves full of estrogen, to grow larger breast tissue, and they often do.
Or you just eat lots of burgers.
Exhibit A. And once you've done that, it is actually then possible to express or lactate a liquid. Okay. If to that liquid you then add another load of pills, medication, chemicals, whatever, that lactation juice can be fed to a baby.
We don't really... This is not for the sake of the baby. The baby has no benefits from this whatsoever. The studies are very weak on it. It's a bit worrying because, when hospitals started indulging in homeopathy and having, the NHS had homeopathic hospitals, that was worrying because they're supposed to be a trusted authority. And before saying something like this, there should be an awful lot of study done.
I want to shame this hospital. This is
whether it's necessary.
University Hospital Sussex NHS Foundation Trust. That's who it is. And they have written one of the stupidest sentences I have read aloud in the 2 years that I've been privileged to do this show. It says, the term human milk is meant to be neutral and not gender biased.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's incredible.
Yep. Oh, my God, we're laughing at you.
I mean, and as someone says here, babies are not props. And that's the scary thing. And when we're not focusing primarily on the health of a baby.
No, but the feeling of a person doing it rather than it's a bit of an odd way to go, isn't it? So.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Since Friday, voters in Russia have been variously coaxed, cajoled and coerced into voting in an election that everyone knows can have only one result. 6 more years for President Vladimir Putin. In occupied Ukraine, voting started early and typically under the supervision of armed Russian soldiers. Putin wants to ensure a significant turnout to bolster his credibility and to suggest public support for his war against Ukraine. To help us to understand these nuances, I'm joined by Adam Ure, who's an expert on Russia and Ukraine at the Lvivsky Consultancy. Welcome, Adam. Thank you very much for coming in on Sunday.
Thank you.
Help us to understand this because, I mean, we in the West understand that all serious candidates have been arrested or in some cases eliminated, so there cannot be serious candidates. We know that the Constitution was manipulated and that the referendum in which that was put to the people was done in a very unsatisfactory and untransparent manner. So nobody in the West is going to say that this is the legitimate result. So why does Vladimir Putin care about things like turnout and indeed his own majority?
I think you're right to point to turnout. That is the key point of these elections. The result, as you say, is pre-known, and I don't think there are any illusions either in Russia or around the world as to who's going to win these elections. The point of these, to my mind, is turnout as a demonstration of legitimacy, as a symbolism of coercion, and also, in a way, as an act of repression. And I think it's important to understand the way that the repressive regime in Russia works. That there is a holistic system here that relies not just on physical threats, not just on torture and murder and the elimination of potential oppositions, but it relies also on the repression of information. And the way that that messaging works is to intimidate people, to intimidate voters. And I think the fact of turnout here is a clear message of repression and fear to the Russian people. The fact that Putin will be mobilised and supported by a huge number of people. And the greater the turnout, I think the more that places pressure and fear on potential oppositions, eliminates them, and also undermines the potential threat that they could have politically to him going forward.
So you think the audience for this is internal? It's not meant to impress other countries?
I think it is internal. That is the key point, yes, as well.
We might add that apart from all these whips, there are also carrots for people to go to the polls. There's a sort of party atmosphere. There might be free drink. There might be the opportunity to win a raffle and things like that.
That is true. I've been to a Russian presidential election before and been to one of the electoral stations. It was in 2012, so not recently. Just to, at the time, to find out for myself how it works and to find out the atmosphere and processes there. The atmosphere, I think, in 2012 was a lot different, but there was a party atmosphere. It was very welcoming. People were greeted with balloons, music, posters, very friendly electoral staff who are also very bemused to see me walking around and having a look. As you say, now that has changed. So there is a lot of coercion. There are tea, cakes. There's been a lot of unofficial messaging sent out on Telegram channels that people could potentially meet their prospective future partner there, that it would be a good opportunity for young people to go and meet a potential date. There's also been a lot of coercion about this. Russia has a very large public sector, so people in public sector jobs have been ordered by their bosses to go and vote. There are stories over the past couple of days of people being bussed from their work to electoral stations, in some cases being taken there too early, so left outside the electoral stations, waiting for them to open. So there are a whole load of carrots and sticks, as you say, and also in the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine, where illegal elections are being held, there is a lot more coercion. So again, that goes back to the holistic, repressive structure and system that Putin has created over the past 25 years, which does work in different areas. But
what can opponents do?
Sorry?
What can opponents do?
It's very, very difficult, but they understand very well this holistic information and repression and the system that Putin and the regime have set up, which doesn't just rely on physical acts of repression, but relies on symbolic acts of repression and informational repression, as I've said. So the opposition has relied greatly on trying to pierce through that symbolism and the informational side. They've tried to express in various ways, although they can't physically take on the Putin regime, and there's no way that they'll be able to win this election. They are trying to promote as much as they can informational acts that demonstrate some kind of expression and opposition.
If they don't vote, they increase Putin's victory. And if they do vote, they increase the turnout. So they're really kind of stuffed, aren't they? I understand that Navalny had this idea that people should go en masse to the polls at a particular moment to create the look of a demonstration.
Yes, that's going on as we speak. That's the midday against Putin. And
is that today?
That is today, and that was supposedly at midday Moscow time. So it's been going on really from morning our time into the afternoon. And as we speak now, the opposition are trying to promote this as much as they can. There is a kind of cat and mouse game going on at this moment on Telegram, with opposition figures trying to promote this midday against Putin. The idea behind that is that everyone should just turn up at 12 o'clock, because there is no other way that they can express their opposition. But if they go at 12 o'clock, then that is a way symbolically that they can try and pierce through this information structure. The problem with that is that they have been going en masse, and they've been putting up pictures and videos on Telegram of them in lines queuing for electoral stations, claiming that this is a part of the opposition queuing up and voting. At the same time, pro-Putin Telegram channels are, as we speak, claiming that this opposition campaign has failed, that the opposition, as it was, should already admit that it's not working, and that these people queuing up are actually voting for Putin.
An American commentator this morning told GB of examples, which are obviously anecdotal, but voters going along and saying, you know, we've got 1.7%, no, sorry, we've got 2% growth, more than 2% growth. We've got 7% inflation. It was 1,500% when Putin came to power. We're grateful to Putin, and we're coming along because voting is like shaking his hand. So, I mean, clearly, some people are completely enthusiastic. I was going to say taken in, but that would be maybe a bit too prejudiced. But they're enthusiastic.
Yes, they are. The difficulty, as I say, is that Putin has learned, and his regime has learned very well over the past quarter of a century, how to control their population, how to use these various levers in order to cajole people to support him, to eliminate the opposition in a variety of informational but also physical ways. And what you're left with really is very limited choices for people to actually act in this. And the Putin regime get this. The The only way really that they've had, as I said, is to try and leverage these different symbolic and informational points to try and at least express opposition and punch through this holistic repressive system that Putin's put in place. There are other indicators about the economy, as you say, that do seem to work in Putin's favour. I think there are questions, really, after this election comes and Putin 5.0 appears, as to how those are leveraged and how he's able to maintain this support, and also how he's going to further manipulate the information space, but also use more physical ways to suppress the people.
An extraordinary thought touching at the end there, which is that one way or another, it's a fifth term. Thank you very much to Adam Muir. After the break, we'll pay tribute to a tireless campaigner for the traditional counties of England, who sadly died earlier this year. Stay with us.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, I'm sure you have seen this video that went viral this week, and if you haven't, well, I think you're going to enjoy it. This is a firefighter leaning on a fence whilst watching a trapped driving instructor's car sink in 4 feet of floodwater. Looks very comfortable there, doesn't he? Just leaning against the fence.
Just chilling, just relaxing. Yeah, there were two. There were, in fact, 2 Essex fire and rescue crews, an ambulance and a police car parked near the sinking vehicle, but they wouldn't enter the water because they had to wait for specialist crews who were trained for the water depth.
Well, 2 people who weren't going to sit back and watch were these 2, Jack and Danielle Price, who took it upon themselves to rescue the submerged driver. And Danielle joins us now. Very good morning to you, Danielle, and you are a hero, an absolute hero. What happened in this video? Make sense of it for us.
So we were filming in the area for our YouTube channel, and we've seen the fire brigade come through. I was actually out at 5 o'clock in the morning with my husband, Jamie. We know it always happens there, as you can see, and it was clear. We've seen the fire brigade come through, we've followed them, and they're just standing around as if nothing's happened. In the clip, it says he's fine, he's on his phone, and then sort of walked away. But what they failed to realise is when my partner actually opened the door, as you can hear, he's on the phone to the emergency crew in panic, thinking he's going to sink. So we could not just sit there and watch. He's absolutely terrified.
Yeah, poor bloke. Well done you. Do you reckon this is health and safety gone mad?
It is, because although I do sympathise with them, they are so red-taped, but surely sort of common sense has to kick in as open the door.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. Pam Morehouse was born in Bradford in the West Riding of Yorkshire in 1946, and as a little girl she moved to Grimsby in Lincolnshire. But before her 30th birthday, that short description of her birth and childhood had been rendered out of date by the 1972 Local Government Act. Officially, her place of birth was now West Yorkshire, and her hometown was in the non-metropolitan county of Humberside. This, to Pam, was a piece of cultural and geographic vandalism that she could not abide, and she spent much of her life campaigning for the restoration of Britain's historic counties, the repositories, she believed, of unique cultures and characteristics that shouldn't be swept away by bureaucrats in Whitehall. Here she is explaining why she felt so strongly about the issue in a video for the British Counties campaign.
To get recognition of the traditional counties, you need massive education for everybody. All school children should know all this, and it should be out in tourist information in museums, which at the moment it certainly isn't. I'm angry about what happened to the counties because it was forced on us. Certain laws are pushed through and you accept them and like it, or you get punished for not obeying, which is dreadfully unfair when we're a democratic country. We choose our leaders, our MPs, our councillors, so we should have a say, complete say, in what they actually do.
Pam died earlier this year at the age of 77. Her passing was marked in the Telegraph by none other than GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, who joins me now. Christopher, good morning to you. Your reflections on Pam, why did you choose to write about her at the time?
I thought what Pam represented, Michael, was something important. I think people want, where you live is so important to your identity. I was born in Liverpool, Lancashire, and when I was 3, it became Merseyside. I'm not sure what, well, I was too young to know, but I just think that it matters, this kind of thing. I was struck by an admission by Michael Heseltine that he had ripped up these historic counties by taking a light aircraft flight across the country and redrawing lines on a map. I mean, if you have an example of a kind of Whitehall diktat, just changing the identity of where people live, it's that. And we're seeing more of that now with the changing in people's street names from names which may seem offensive to some people to something else. And I think what is forgotten about these things in Whitehall or town halls is that where you live really matters, and you mess with these historic boundaries at your peril. And Pam Morehouse, as a factory worker, and the Telegraph ran a very, very good obituary of her, making clear that, you know, she is a late blossomer in politics, but she really fought very hard, and she was really frustrated that Whitehall had discarded these historic names. We are seeing them come back, aren't we? I think that Cumbria is now Westland and Cumberland, so we're seeing some of them re-emerge. But this stuff matters, Michael.
Christopher Hope, thank you very much for joining me on a Sunday morning. I'm going to turn now to Gerard Dugdale, her friend and co-campaigner. Obviously, sympathy on the death of Pam. Tell me about how successful you think she was.
It's a little bit frustrating because she's passed, I think, just a moment or so before her true time. So I think that we were getting 30, 40, towards the 50% mark in terms of success, which obviously needs a job to be done, and a job that's left over. So she's got the boat out into the middle of the river, but we need to carry on rowing now to the other side. And to make sure that her legacy gets the ultimate fulfilment.
Christopher was mentioning there that some old names have returned. Has that been quite a widespread process, or has it just been 1 or 2 examples?
It's 50%, isn't it? Because the government don't really know what they're doing, or they're obfuscating so deliberately, but they're just leaving everybody in a state of complete bewilderment. I mean, Chris Hope said, OK, we've got Cumberland and Westmoreland back as council areas, but those aren't the true council areas relating to the counties. So, for example, Penrith is in Westmoreland Council, but Cumberland County. But above all that, you've still got some of these 1974 creations like Cumbria as ceremonial counties, which persist and are still going to be, for the moment, the ultimate reference points for our county identity.
You must have thought about this a lot. How did it happen, particularly, I think, in the 1970s, by the way, under a Conservative government, that Whitehall knew best, that ministers decided that they really could make these changes, apparently without much consultation, obviously, certainly without a referendum or anything like that?
Well, you could ask Mr Heseltine about that. It would be great to get him on the programme. I wanted to get him here with Pam to talk about it. But Henry Smith MP, who's one of our champion MPs, I think put it the best way. The devil makes work for idle hands to do. And if you have the feeling that you've got to sort of make your mark somehow in life, that's what you do, and you start meddling with things that shouldn't be meddled with.
You see, I can't imagine any government, any party thinking, ooh, we'll put this into a manifesto and this will be one of the things that will really help us get elected. So it seems to me it must have been something that cropped up while they were in government. There must have been a phalanx of, I don't know, civil servants or ideologues of some kind who suddenly thought that it was a brilliant idea to redraw the counties. I suppose it was one of these white heat of technology things, one of these ideas that if it were different and modern, it must be better. Because, I mean, people did think like that in those days.
I think that's wishful thinking, with the greatest of respect to Mr Portillo. I think it might just be... I think you need to ask that question to Mr Heseltine again. He wanted to make his mark, so he says. And, hey, who were the humble civil servants to stand in their way? I mean, I like the principle of the civil servants kowtowing to an ambitious minister, but maybe sometimes the civil service needs to put a rein in and make sure that things kept ticking over nicely.
Well, OK, so let me ask you kind of a very obvious question. What's wrong with, say, Merseyside? What's wrong with bringing the services not only of Liverpool but of the Wirral and the hinterland together? Because, after all, you know, a police car isn't going to stop at the boundaries of Lancashire. It needs to continue to do its work.
But you could just do it in such a sympathetic way. I mean, if you look at America, for example, they haven't mangled the states because you get urban areas overspilling. Look at Kansas City, for an example, for an American state. So you've got an urban area and you've got coordination over that urban area, but you've got a very clear dividing line, historic dividing line that preserves our history between whatever the two states are, Kansas and Missouri, off the top of my head.
It is, I think it's Missouri. I'm trying to think myself.
OK, so let's do it skillfully. We need to build on the past. We don't live in the past, we build on it, and we head for a great future that cherishes the past of our nation, as all nations should.
And that's what Pam Morehouse was all about.
Yes, sir, thank you.
No, thank you very much indeed, Gerard Dugdale. Well, from historic counties to historic houses, which continue to reveal their secrets. Burghley House, the home of Elizabeth I's great minister, Sir William Cecil, revealed more of its history recently when an ancient Roman stone head was found buried in the grounds. The house's creator, John Culverhouse, will be with me in a few minutes to explain.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So today has started quite cloudy and damp for some of us, but that will gradually be turning brighter as we head through the afternoon. The area of rain that we can see across much of England and Wales eventually pushes its way eastwards through the latter half of the morning, with some brighter spells developing behind. However, for Northern Ireland and for Scotland, it has been a bit of a drier and brighter start this morning. Plenty of sunshine around here, and through the afternoon, that sunshine developing more widely across England and Wales. We will see some showers bubbling up, and they could be heavy in places, but another really mild day, 16 or 17 degrees in the south. Through Sunday evening, any of those showers across much of England, Northern Ireland and in Scotland will gradually start to ease overnight, so turning a little drier for most of us by the end of Sunday. But another band of rain then pushes in from the west, spreading its way eastwards through the early hours of Monday morning. Away from this area of rain, though, it will be a cloud-free night, so under those clear skies, temperatures dropping down into the single figures, perhaps as low as 2 or 3 in some rural spots. Into the start of Monday, that band of rain pushes its way eastwards. It gradually starts to ease through the early hours of the morning, leaving quite a dry and bright start for most of us. Plenty of sunshine through the first part of the day. But for Northern Ireland, cloud does start to build, so turning much greyer as we head through the afternoon, with further outbreaks of rain pushing in from the west through Monday afternoon. But staying dry elsewhere, and with temperatures around 15 or 16 degrees, it'll be feeling very pleasant in that sunshine.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think
think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. So Keir Starmer is set to insist today that Labour can deliver security for decades and is ready to make the difficult decisions. He'll be speaking at the Scottish Labour conference in Glasgow later today in an attempt to woo voters away from the Scottish National Party. It comes as the Labour leader launched attacks on Donald Trump over his comments on NATO. Earlier, the GB News breakfast team spoke to political commentator Sophia Warringer.
He's trying to set himself up as this world leader in foreign affairs, not just in domestic affairs. Although his comment to about Donald Trump was thinly veiled, I think he didn't exactly directly address him, but he was talking about the need to rebuild and renew and strengthen the NATO alliance rather than fracture it, which was a direct comment about the potential of Trump, if he wins the US election, which the polls are suggesting may be likely, and his desire to withdraw America's support from the long-standing alliance of that type.
I mean, clearly, Sir Keir is buoyed by what we saw in the two by-election results over the last few days. But the fact that he's going to say, well, two key things. One, that Labour can deliver security for decades, but also that voters, if they vote Labour in Scotland, will be able to have the power to build a new Scotland. It all sounds very strong, very sort of very encouraging for voters north of the border. But what does it actually mean?
That is a very good question. I think Sir Keir Starmer has been very good on the rhetoric here. He is tapping into an understanding that Scotland feel left behind, which obviously the SNP capitalises on. But it's very hard to understand what he means. He talks about the scars left by moving away from traditional industries in Scotland, such as coal mining and steel, and yet he doesn't really say how he will marry his desire to keep Scotland buoyant and have its reliance on these energy consumption industries, and yet also meet his green targets, which obviously seem at odds with his criticism of how Scotland moved away from coal mining. So it's quite difficult to understand exactly what he is promising Scottish voters, apart from grand notions of more close working with local government, etc., to try and peel off some of that SNP vote, which obviously is very clear that they want more independence. But obviously the problem is in Scotland that a lot of the policies that the SNP are promising, a lot of the things that they say voters want are things they can deliver already. They don't need an independent Scotland to be able to deliver that, and yet they keep promising more, but they don't actually look at the powers they have already.
Covering all the bases, the Liberal Democrats have their spring conference in York right at the moment. Their leader, Ed Davey, is addressing the conference. We're going to go live and hear what he has to say.
The truth is, this Prime Minister is now so weak, he will say anything to stop his own right-wing MPs from kicking him out before the British people get the chance. He's outrageously running down the clock, enjoying the trappings of office for a few months more, while the crisis facing our country just get worse and worse and worse. Conference, that shouldn't even be an option for a Prime Minister. And really, it's a small but telling example of what is wrong with our broken political system and the two big parties who prop it up. The only reason Rishi Sunak gets to pick a date of his choosing is because 2 years ago, the Conservatives passed a law taking that power away from Parliament and handing it solely to the Prime Minister. And while Liberal Democrat MPs stood firm and voted no, Labour stood back and let it pass. A shameless act of Conservatives rigging the system in their favour again, but aided and abetted by Labour in the hope that it might one day benefit them too. Never mind the damage it does to public trust in our democracy. Never mind the chaos and uncertainty it causes for business. Never mind all that. The only thing that mattered to the Conservative and Labour parties was their own narrow self-interest. And Liberal Democrats, that's what sets us apart from the other parties. We don't ask how we can benefit from the current system. We ask how we can change the system to benefit everyone. We don't see politics as a game of accumulating power for ourselves. We see it as a chance to put real power in everyone's hands, to give people a fair deal. Because the mess our country is in demands not a plan to tweak things, but a plan to transform everything. When I travel across our great United Kingdom, when I hear from families struggling to make ends meet, small businesses crushed under the weight of Conservative red tape and crippling energy costs, patients waiting months or even years for the treatment they desperately need, when I see how so much in our country just isn't working the way it should, from crumbling schools to sewage in our rivers, I simply can't understand how the other parties don't seem to get it. Steady as she goes isn't going to cut it. The same old answers will only leave us with the same old problems. Tinkering around the edges won't come close to solving anything. And yet...
So that was a live feed. The Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davies, speaking at his party's spring conference. Interesting to me, indeed, that he was speaking there apparently without notes, without a lectern, I think without an auto cue, a technique which I found quite effective. So we were hoping to talk to the curator of Burghley House about the discovery of a Roman statue in the grounds, had a few technical issues, hoping to speak to John Carverhouse in the next hour. So that is all for the first hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo, but please don't wander away. I will be back in a very few minutes, and we'll be talking about controversial artworks, and we'll be talking about Israeli politics. And I will mark the Iranian holiday of Nowruz with the brilliant Hannah Harley-Young. There'll be lots of Iranian food. See you soon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, as we go through the rest of today, we will see the overnight rain finally begin to clear the east, and really for many of us it's a mixture of sunshine and scattered showers. So we can see the weather front responsible for the rain. It's just beginning to move into the North Sea. And for many of us, really, as I said, it's going to be an afternoon of bright spells and scattered showers. It's going to take its time, however, along that east coast, a fairly cloudy and damp Sunday afternoon here. But elsewhere, hopefully, we will see some sunshine. Best of it may well be down towards the southwestern corner. For many, it's going to be a mild day. In the south, could see highs reaching 15, 16, possibly 17 degrees. Into this evening, some clearing skies for a time across England and Wales and turning dry. But further west, another band of cloud and rain moving in. Quite a small area of rain, so not lasting anywhere for too long, but just maintaining this rather changeable picture. But a mild one for all of us. Temperatures not falling much lower than around 5 to 7 degrees across the UK. So a mild start to Monday. This area of cloud and rain just beginning to move in towards the North Sea as we head towards lunchtime. Behind it, some fairly decent weather for a time, especially for central and eastern parts of the country. But further west, another band of rain moving in as we end the afternoon. But again, mild temperatures once again, potentially up to 17 degrees in the southeast.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Want to be a winner?
You've won £18,000.
Oh, flipping heck. I don't know what to say.
enter our massive spring giveaway with 3 big seasonal prizes to be won. There's £12,345 in tax-free cash to give your finances a spring boost. We'll also send you on a shopping spree with £500 worth of vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. You'll also get a garden gadget package. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo. The question of how museums handle works of art whose content is now seen as controversial has led to polarisation. Some argue that offensive imagery must be removed, and others say that responding to modern sensibilities to art created in other times is wokery. The Tate Britain has sought to tread a middle path, retaining a mural painted by Rex Whistler almost a century ago that has been denounced as racist for its depictions of black people, but installing a piece of video art to add context to the original mural. I'll discuss whether this can be a path forward for the museum world with a curator, David Boyd Hancock. A cacophony of international voices criticise the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Our own Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, has become forceful in his calls for Israel to allow aid into Gaza. Perhaps more significant intervention came from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in the United States, who says that Netanyahu should leave the political stage if Israel wants to secure a lasting peace. I'll be speaking to former Israeli diplomat Alan Pinkas to see how all this is playing out in Israel. As I said at the top of the programme, the spring equinox approaches. The people of Iran have for millennia marked the ancient festival. We shall be having our own celebration in the studio as the brilliant Hannah Harley-Young, creator and host of Crazy Sexy Food, will feed me with delicious Iranian dishes. All of that lies ahead of us. But first, the news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Michael, thank you very much, and good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Senior Tories have attempted to downplay claims of a Conservative plot to replace Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister with Penny Mordaunt. Reports in the Mail and the Telegraph say MPs on the right of the party would like Ms Mordaunt to lead them into the next election in an effort to avoid, quote, catastrophic losses in the polls. Former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg denounced the idea as madness. The move would mean a fourth leader of the party in just 5 years. Former Conservative Party leader Serena Duncan-Smith told GB News the main focus should be on the next election and not on Tory infighting.
We've got to stop turning inwards on ourselves and start trying to get behind the idea that we've got an election to fight. And the public wants to know that we're both united and we're very clear. Those points I said earlier on about how to get the Labour Party into an argument that you can then kill them over in terms of the way that you take the debate is really critical, and dynamic politics demands it. What dynamic politics does not demand is literally the sort of third leader in a short space of time that replaced Boris Johnson.
Transport Secretary Mark Harper says that, unlike Labour, the Conservatives have a plan on delivering for the country.
We've got to show them, by the time of the election, two things. We've got to show them that we've got a plan, the plan is working and it's delivering for them. And I think we can see that it is on inflation and on taxes. We've also then got to show them that the Labour Party doesn't have a plan and will be a big risk. You know, for example, we know the Labour Party wants to spend £28 billion on their green plan. They've hidden the price tag now, but they don't know how to pay for it. That would mean taxes going up.
But Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth told GB News the government's priorities are all wrong.
Rishi Sunak is not acting in the national interest. It's reckless, it's irresponsible. He should name the day of a general election and stabilise matters. At the moment, he's more preoccupied with his own leadership and saving his own skin than governing in the national interest. And I think after 14 years, this is a pretty discredited government. He needs to name the date. I mean, but if he doesn't name the date soon, we could have a leadership election soon.
The Ministry of Defence says Grant Shapps was forced to abandon a trip to southern Ukraine last week for security reasons. British intelligence warned of a credible missile threat from Russia, saying the Kremlin had got wind of his visit. That's according to the Sunday Times. Mr Shapps was due to travel to Odessa a day after a missile had hit the city, while the Ukrainian president and the Greek prime minister were visiting there. 5 people were killed in those explosions, according to Ukrainian authorities. Meanwhile, the Latvian Prime Minister has told the Sunday Telegraph that Britain should consider conscription and a total defence model to deter Russian aggression. Latvia reintroduced the model last year, with all able-bodied men required to complete 11 months of military service. However, in January, the UK Armed Forces Minister James Heappey said any talk of the UK introducing conscription to the army if NATO goes to war with Russia was nonsense. That as Russians are casting their ballots on the final day of voting for the country's next president. Vladimir Putin, who's been in power since 1999, is expected to win another 6-year term with a landslide victory. The election comes just over 2 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The first 2 days of the vote saw dozens of incidents of vandalism at polling stations, with several people detained across Russia. A volcano in Iceland has erupted for a 4th time in just 3 months. Previous eruptions destroyed roads and forced a town to evacuate. Fountains of molten rocks can be seen soaring into the night sky from fissures in the ground. Authorities had warned for weeks that an eruption was imminent just south of Iceland's capital, Reykjavik. And Steve Harley, best known as the frontman of Cockney Rebel, has died at the age of 73. Come up and singing to make me smile. The band enjoyed huge success in 1975 with the #1 hit, Make Me Smile. His daughter Greta says he died peacefully with his family by his side. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning that QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Michael.
Thank you, Tatiana Sanchez. In the wake of the Black Lives Matter protest back in 2020, Tate Britain felt compelled to shutter its restaurant, which has on its walls a mural painted by Rex Whistler in the 1920s. The mural had been denounced as racist for its depictions of black people. Rather than remove it, which is in any case impossible under conservation laws, the Tate has now installed a piece of video art to add context to Whistler's artwork. Museums are facing unprecedented pressure to manage how they present artworks from different eras, which contain images that some people find offensive. To discuss whether the Tate's middle path could be a way forward, I'm joined by the art academic and curator David Boyd Hancock. David, welcome to GB News.
Good morning.
You are a specialist in 20th century art.
That's correct.
So tell us a little bit about the Whistler mural in the Tate. A little bit about the context. What is the subject matter?
The subject matter is a sort of a hunt. I mean, Whistler was a very young man when he painted. He was at the Slade School of Art here in London, and he'd been commissioned to decorate the whole walls of this restaurant, a beautiful restaurant. And so the theme is a hunt for delectables, food. These people are going on a sort of hunt almost around the sort of the world. They go to Africa, to China, and they're on this sort of big adventure with a story to it, and discovering all sorts of curiosities and foods along the way.
So how could there come into this? How could there intrude into this image, for example, of a young black boy with a chain around his neck being towed behind a carriage, I think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a curious interlude episode in the narrative. I mean, it's a very tiny. There's two little black characters, maybe three, and then there's a couple of Chinese characters as well. They go to Cathay, China, and the Great Wall. So I don't know. It has been interpreted as sort of a jokey part in this fantasy story, which is very exotic. It's about Whistler sort of representing this sort of story, and it seems very anomalous in it. I mean, it's a very small part of the whole mural. I mean, it's been called in the New York Times in places this racist mural, but it's not at all. It's just these two little tiny elements, which largely went largely unnoticed for decades.
Well, I used to go to the Tate Gallery, as it was called in those days, Tate Gallery restaurant, a great deal. It was a very remarkable restaurant. I mean, it wasn't sort of the restaurant of the gallery. It was an institution, a destination in itself. It attracted a lot of politicians, a lot of journalists. It had a fabulous wine list. But, of course, one of the joys of lunching or dining there was the mural. But I must say, none of us, as far as I know, ever studied it in detail or spotted this.
No, I mean, I only ever dined in there once. I was commissioned to write a book for the Tate, and they very kindly took me for lunch there. I hadn't been able to afford it before. It seemed very, it's very beautiful and very expensive. But yeah, certainly, sort of sitting down, you wouldn't have noticed unless you actually sat right next to it, in one of the tables sort of next to it. You wouldn't have noticed. And apparently, it had been brought to attention prior to Black Lives Matter movement. And
all the way back in the 1970s, it appears that at least somebody had complained about it. What do you think of the up-to-date response? What do you think of the idea of this video installation alongside it?
Well, I haven't seen the installation yet, but I've read some interesting interviews with the artist Keith Piper, and he seems to have done a wonderful job with it. I think it's a very interesting response that they've done. He's clearly delved into the whole history of what Whistler was trying to do with the murals, his work, and it's a very sensitive, thoughtful response. And what they've done is it's a conversation between what Piper calls sort of maybe the ghost of Whistler, an actor playing his part, and a university professor sort of interviewing him. And it's a 22-minute piece, and a dialogue between them discussing Whistler's work, but then aspects equally of this detail in his painting. And as I understand it, the professor talks and asks Whistler about it. And Piper very rightly hasn't put words into Whistler's mouth. He says so Whistler sort of hesitates when it comes to this part of the discussion and sort of tries to sort of pass over it. But that's all that's in there. So it's moved from being a restaurant to being an art piece.
Yes.
So it's the entirety of the walls.
I mean, apart from anything else, I imagine this has been quite damaging to the Tate's finances, because I assume it was quite a substantial income generator. Now, Do you think this is the way forward in general? I mean, there must be lots of works of art that somebody's going to find offensive, but maybe even a reasonable person would find offensive. Are we going to have to create a counter piece of art in every case, do you think?
Well, it's unusual, the Whistler restaurant, because it's on the walls there, so there was no way of removing it. I mean, some critics were saying it ought to be destroyed, which is a sort of appalling idea for that. But a lot of work is taken off the walls and then just ends up in the stores. So Stanley Spencer, an artist I write a lot about, he did a very beautiful, huge painting, the Crucifixion, the Resurrection at Cookham, at the same time, virtually of Whistler. And that has these black figures who are being resurrected at the same time in the little Berkshire village of Cookham. And offence was taken at that representation there, for example. So that's a very big work that is currently not on show and is not likely to be seen again. And that tends to be the easier way of doing things. But then there is equally an awful lot of interpretation. So a museum where I live in Oxford, the Pitt Rivers Museum, that's got into quite a debate about where its collection has come from and trying to interpret that in a new sort of fashion. But I think commissioning artworks is a very interesting way of doing that. And I think Piper's responded very cleverly to what they've asked him to do.
Do you share the view that some people have that it seems now that teams at some of our great collections are not keen to defend the body of work that they manage, that they're kind of almost leading the opposition to it?
Yes, yeah, there is definitely a feel of that, and I think that's unfortunate, and that's becoming more commonplace, and I think it's driven by younger curators, younger academics coming through with a different sort of agenda to what existed before, and do feel a certain amount of reason to, almost to attack the works in their collection, and even find offence where there isn't offence intended. So the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, for example, is sort of causing controversy a bit at the moment with its own reinterpretation of its collections, and looking at landscapes, I mean, Constable landscapes, and bringing in sort of issues of politics and race and national identity into what really seems like a sort of an innocent painting of the English countryside.
David, thank you very much. David Boyd Hancock. England's country houses tantalise us with their secrets, and perhaps none more so than the grand Burghley House, home of one of the greatest statesmen of England, William Cecil. He was the shepherd to Queen Elizabeth I. Almost a year ago, as workmen were digging for a new car park, they found in the bucket of the excavator an ancient Roman marble head. It's estimated to be 1,800 years old at least. As of this weekend, it's going on display at Burghley House. But to explain the mystery of how it ended up buried some 300 yards from the house, it's my pleasure to be joined by the house's creator, John Culverhouse. John, very good to see you and welcome to GB News. So what do we think was the origin of this head? It's Roman, is it?
The head is Roman. The that it joins to is Italian, but I think much later added to the head in the 18th century to make up a souvenir for the rich aristocrat travelling on his grand tour in Italy.
And tell us who that aristocrat was in this case.
This was Brownlow, the 9th Earl of Exeter. Marvellous man, travelled twice around Italy, bought large amounts of fine art that are still in the collection, and it's just the kind of thing that he would have purchased.
OK, you're fairly confident about that. What are your theories as to why it would end up 300 yards away from the house?
I'm a lot vaguer there. The area it was found is alongside, if you like, the back entrance to Burghley. It's not a main driveway, and the bust and head are too small to have just been placed beside a roadway. They'd need a plinth or a pedestal or something like that. My only thought is a bungled burglary. If somebody pinched it from the gardens closer to the house, perhaps, it's blooming heavy. By the time they got it down to the side of the drive, it was probably, let's put it under a tree, come back for it later and put some earth over it, and thus it stayed.
We were looking at some photographs there, which I think showed you alongside the mechanical digger driver. Tell us about the moment of the discovery.
Greg was a lovely guy. The car park in my house, and so I'd got to know Greg over the months when he was working adjacent. And the look on his face when he came to my back door holding this wonderful head, it was one of those moments. You don't get it very often. And to cap that, when I was in my office 2 weeks later, or a week or so later, they came in and said, "We've got something else." Yes, what? And there was the bust that goes with the head. Quite astonishing. And probably the most astonishing thing, they hadn't broken. Well, there was one scratch on the face. Apart from that, there was no damage to either.
No, that's absolutely marvellous. I mean, there's some luck there, but there's also someone who's been very careful and very thoughtful. So you've been trying to piece together the story. You've also been trying to piece together the pieces, haven't you? So you have reunited the head with the bust.
They have rejoined. We sent the whole off to Kate Bowles in Harrow, who is a remarkably skilled conservator, and she worked on it for some months, little by little, taking off some of the filth, but leaving an amount of encrustation just to show the story of this beautiful lady. When it came back, it was, well, I had seen photographs in the interim, but it was still pretty much a revelation. She is a very beautiful person.
And she will now be on display at Burghley House.
She's being shown on a windowsill on the Hell Staircase, which is on the end of the tour of the house, and also on the Hell Staircase area are half a dozen other marbles which the Ninth Earl bought on the same journey in Italy.
Marbles and marbles. Thank you very much indeed, John Culverhouse. After the break, we will move to the Middle East, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is being denounced by enemies and allies. Stay with us.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
Is a debate on gender really a far-right issue?
Far right. I'm so bored of that phrase, you know what I mean? Like, anyone who talks about, anyone who acknowledges that there are two sexes is suddenly far right, because that's what Hitler and Mussolini were all about. This question from Shirley is, of course, about Labour. They've been accused of being undemocratic because they pressured a pub into cancelling a debate, and this debate features Kelly J. Keane, who's been on this show a couple of times, and she's a campaigner, and she was just on the panel, and then they got a letter saying that they couldn't do it because Kelly J. Keane apparently attracts far-right groups. Now, they've tried this trick before, but because some awful, ghastly neo-Nazi types turned up near to an event that she was holding in Australia, they kind of tried to blame that on her and suggest that the two were the same thing. They weren't. That was an opportunistic group turning up to... They're not... Neo-Nazis aren't pro-feminist. They're not pro an event called Let Women Speak. That's just ridiculous.
New Zealand's TV blurred her touching her zip because they said that her touching her zip was a far-right dog whistle because she's making that symbol.
Yeah, but she wasn't making the symbol, she was just adjusting her zip.
Yeah, and also, this isn't a far-right symbol.
I mean, that was incredible because she obviously wasn't making that symbol anyway. She was just adjusting her top. But this New Zealand news channel blurred out the hand so that they could pretend that it was some horrible ghastly...
Yeah,
I mean, this is stuff, isn't it?
She's talked about having voted Labour in the past. She's so not far right.
But also,
I mean,
even if she were right-wing, which she
Yes.
isn't, why would they be banning a panel where there's a discussion about one of the most important issues of our day? What are Labour playing at here?
They're anti-democratic, aren't they? They're just kind of playing whack-a-mole with things they don't like. I think maybe I'll write to the pub and say I do want to see Kelly J. Keane there.
Yeah, but they won't listen to you
Well,
if
no,
you say
they
that,
won't.
will
They
they?
won't.
Because you've got the unfashionable opinion, Chris.
Well, I'm the unfashionable workplace.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The Israeli Prime Minister has been the subject of scathing international criticism for much of his political career. Since Israel launched its operation to root out Hamas, following the October 7th attacks by that terror group that killed 1,200 Israeli civilians, senior political leaders in states that are friendly to Israel are concerned that Netanyahu is now an obstacle to peace. The most significant intervention came from Chuck Schumer, the United States' Senate Majority Leader, who is Jewish. Schumer called for elections in Israel and made clear that he thought it time for Netanyahu to exit the political stage.
The fourth major obstacle to peace is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has all too frequently bowed to the demands of extremists like Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the settlers in the West Bank. Now, if Prime Minister Netanyahu's current coalition remains in power after the war begins to wind down and continues to pursue dangerous and inflammatory policies that test existing U.S. standards for assistance, then the United States will have no choice but to play a more active role in shaping Israeli policy by using our leverage to change the present course.
To find out how all this is playing out in Israel, I'm joined by former Israeli diplomat Alan Pinkas, who joins me from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for coming on GB News. First of all, why do you think that Chuck Schumer delivered that speech and made those points?
Hi, Michael. Good to be with you again. I think there were three reasons or three explanations to his speech. The first was that it serves the president, that he uses proxies to exert pressure on Israel. The second explanation is that there is a increasing fatigue, disappointment, and disillusionment with Mr. Netanyahu, whom the Americans do not necessarily any longer see as an ally. And the third explanation, Michael, would be that this was a sort of an introduction to a series of American moves, even though Mr. Schumer, although he's the Senate Majority Leader, is not a policymaker, but rather a legislator. This was the beginning of a series of moves that the Americans are thinking of making. And the response predictably came very quickly. Mr. Netanyahu today accuses the American administration of no less than lacking conscience and conscience. I'm sorry. And that instead of pressuring Israel, they should pressure Hamas, which doesn't really make sense unless Mr. Netanyahu, and I think Mr. Schumer called it right, unless Mr. Netanyahu is intent and deliberately seeking a confrontation with the Biden administration.
As ever in the United States, this has led to polarization. Republicans have attacked Chuck Schumer. And they, I think, are showing a pretty willful disregard for the degree of controversy that now surrounds Netanyahu in Israel. Do you want to speak to that point, please?
You broke up. To disregard for what, Michael?
The Republicans, in criticising Schumer, are showing a willful disregard for the truth of the extent of controversy in Israel about Netanyahu's premiership.
Okay, well, there are two things here. First of all, the Republicans, ever since October 7th, have refrained from attacking Biden for a very sinister and quite predictable political reason. They have seen that his support, his unwavering support for Israel, is actually costing him politically. He's hemorrhaging votes in several swaths of the American electorate, Arab Americans in Michigan, the African American community, and particularly across the board amongst the young. And secondly, on the what you referred to, Michael, and that's a critical point that you made. Mr. Schumer was speaking after knowing or being cognizant of the polls in Israel that indicate clearly that 70% of Israelis want Netanyahu to call for an early election, 65% think he should resign, 69% think that he's being driven by political survival rather than the well-being of the hostages and a ceasefire. So
he faced a lot of opposition before the war began.
I think that Mr. Mr. Schumer was tapping on knowledge of both Israel and current trends in U.S. public opinion.
I'm sorry that we have a delay on the line, but I hope that our viewers can make out what we're saying. I was going to say to you that Netanyahu was quite unpopular even before the war began. What are the elements of the conduct of the war that may have increased his unpopularity?
Correct. Okay, that's another good question. First of all, he's being seen widely as being responsible for the October 7th debacle, but at the same time refusing to take responsibility, unlike, say, Neville Chamberlain in 1940. He has also refused to be held accountable. He has also refused consistently to call for an election, saying, for example, I am responsible, I am accountable, I need to run, I need to manage the war now, we will have enough time for an election, and I plan to call for an election immediately after the war. He has failed to do any of those. And so his failure to take responsibility is one thing that is leading to increasing his unpopularity. The second is a growing notion that he does not prioritize the release of the hostages and instead is being driven by political survival instincts. And the third is that his statements, we will demolish, we will annihilate, we will eradicate, we will topple Hamas, has not happened until now. And so you take the three of those combined, his responsibility, his failure to be held accountable, and the management of the war, and that obviously increases his unpopularity, which, by the way, right now stands, Michael, at 19%, 19%.
Alan Pinkas, I thank you very much indeed for that very precise analysis, which helps us enormously to understand what is going on in Israel today. Later in the show, we'll be marking the Iranian festival of the equinox with the creator and host of Crazy Sexy Food, Hannah Harley-Young. Before that, here are the latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Michael, thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Senior Tories have attempted to downplay claims of a Conservative plot to replace Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister with Penny Mordaunt. Reports in the Mail and the Telegraph say MPs on the right of the party would like Ms Mordaunt to lead them into the next election in an effort to avoid, quote, catastrophic losses in the polls. Former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg denounced the idea as madness. The move would mean a fourth leader of the party in just 5 years. The Ministry of Defence says Grant Shapps was forced to abandon a trip to southern Ukraine last week for security reasons. British intelligence warned of a credible missile threat from Russia, saying the Kremlin had got wind of his visit, according to the Sunday Times. Mr. Shapps was due to travel to Odessa a day after a missile hit the city, while the Ukrainian president and the Greek prime minister were visiting. 5 people were killed in the explosions, according to Ukrainian authorities. Russians are casting their ballots on the final day of voting for the country's next president. Vladimir Putin, who's been in power since 1999, is expected to win another 6-year term with a landslide victory. The election comes just over 2 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The first 2 days of the vote saw dozens of incidents of vandalism at polling stations, with several people detained across Russia. A volcano in Iceland has erupted for a fourth time in 3 months. Previous eruptions destroyed roads and forced a town to evacuate. Fountains of molten rock can be seen soaring into the night sky from fissures in the ground. Authorities had warned for weeks that an eruption was imminent, just south of Iceland's capital, Reykjavik. And Steve Harley, best known as the frontman of British rock band Cockney Rebel, has died at the age of 73.
Come up and see me to make me smile.
The band enjoyed success in 1975 with the #1 hit, Make Me Smile. Steve Harley had still been touring until recently, but cancelled dates to have treatment for cancer. His daughter Greta says he died peacefully with his family by his side. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
'Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 p.m.
Our first question comes from Elliot. Elliot, hello.
Is Canada now an authoritarian state?
Elliot, I think it's been an authoritarian state for a while. I mean, under Trudeau, this is a new thing now, and this is coming from the Justice Minister, who has Arif Virani, and he has defended this new power for their online harms bill. That sounds familiar. We've got something quite similar. And they're saying they can now impose house arrest on someone who they think might commit a hate crime in the future, right? That's scary stuff, isn't it?
There's obviously a very dark side to this, because you can't, or in my opinion, you shouldn't be able to imprison somebody before they've done anything.
Right.
Well, it is Canada, and I know you in this country, you kind of respect Canada as a country. America didn't even know it was a country until recently, and I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to show themselves to be different than America.
I think America has a responsibility to invade. You know what? I do.
You know, you're kidding, but it may come down to this, or this may just be a yeah, maybe.
Well, I just think it's ridiculous that the idea of arresting someone... I mean, our government's bad enough, and the Scottish government's out of control, the Irish government's out of control. They're all talking about... I mean, the Irish government's got a new hate crimes bill where they're talking about they can seize your phone if they suspect you might have some material that could potentially stir up hatred. I mean, for God's sake, what does that mean? Your phone's full of that kind of thing.
Well, the government knows that.
Yeah.
But you're right. But it has to do with the bigger picture, which is Canada has sucked itself in on the big team world. Sorry, I'm going to say it. It's big team world. And what they're doing, this is not even a free speech issue. This is just about silencing dissent against the Canadian government. It has nothing to do with openness and talk, whatever. It's like saying, we don't want these people to spread their opinions.
Dangerous opinions. That's what speech codes and hate speech laws always do.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Dawn Neeson will be taking over at 1 o'clock. Dawn, regale us with what is on your show.
We have got a brilliant, perfect St Patrick's Day show. We're just going to have some fun today. We have a giant fish waving a Union flag. We have some brilliant guests. We're asking, has the penny dropped with the Conservative Party?
Which penny?
Well, take your pick. But Penny Mordaunt. Is she really the stalking horse? We've also got conscription. Would you sign up, Michael?
If I were the right age...
Dad's Army. Dad's Army. We're talking
exactly.
Dad's Army here. Come on, you can cope with that one, can't you?
Dawn, very good. And so Ireland's had a pretty good time recently. They've won the Six Nations.
Indeed, absolutely, yeah. Obviously, with the surname like Neeson, I have to support... My husband's sort of like got some Irish blood, so that's why I'm supporting that. And we are going live to Ireland for some celebrations as well. So it's going to be a proper Irish knees up on the show today.
Much to look forward to. Dawn will be here at 1 o'clock. Well, it is an excellent weekend to be Irish. They have won the Six Nations. Galopin des Champs has won the Gold Cup at Cheltenham, and in Dublin and Belfast and London, parades are getting underway for St Patrick's Day. Dougie Beattie is at the Belfast parade, which will be setting up very soon. Dougie, tell me, are the recent sporting triumphs celebrated all the way through the island of Ireland?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, the Irish rugby team has always been a force to be reckoned with, and it is an All-Ireland team. Of course, we do have a cricket All-Ireland team, and, you know, there's other things like basketball and so forth, but really the Irish rugby team is the main sport that is an All-Ireland basis, and it always has been. And to be honest about it, it's because they do so well with grassroots. It's also because things like the GAA are there that teach the children to catch a ball above their head while in flight without looking at it, that really bring forward rugby to the stage that it is at this minute in time. And it is celebrated the whole way through the island of Ireland. Yesterday I was in a very unionist area on South Belfast on the Malone Road, and that was Estonians Rugby Club, who play tomorrow actually in the Schools Cup against the Ballymena School, and that is a big day for them. So rugby really does unite Ireland. Horse racing, of course, unites Ireland. A lot of horsey stuff here. And St Patrick's Day, Michael, there's no doubt about it. It really does unite Ireland because it is the patron saint of Ireland. And of course, St Patrick's celebrated all over the world because the Irish built a lot of the cities in the world, and they brought their culture with them to celebrate it. But they were economic migrants that went for to build and to work and to bring the money back to Ireland, and they always like to hold that bit of culture with them. And it really has paid off for them. And this parade's due to start very shortly. And actually, I'll see if I can grab anybody here. Yeah, there's a man here. Sir, how are you?
You're very good, thank you.
You're not from Ireland?
No, Scotland.
And what brings you to here today?
St Patrick's Day parade, family connections with my wife and a cousin, or Mackenzie's. So they've got a connection back here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day. So there you go, Michael. It does bring tourism as well. We've got sport, but it is this year is very strange because the Six Nations, the Cheltenham Festival, St Patrick's Day all fall together, which means tomorrow is a bank holiday. And of course, there'll be Hangover Tuesday coming very, very shortly.
Dougie, have a wonderful time. I hope all the people of Belfast and of Dublin, and indeed those parading in London, have a marvellous afternoon. After the break, a feast of delicious dishes, as Hannah Harley-Young will be in the studio to celebrate the Iranian festival of Nowruz.
We've got cash, treats and a spring shopping spree to be won in a great British giveaway. You could win an amazing £12,345 in tax-free cash. Plus, there's a further £500 of shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. We'll also give you a gadget package to use in your garden this spring. That includes a games console, a pizza oven and a portable smart speaker, so you can listen to GB News on the go. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive?
Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. At this time of year, millions of people in Iran and surrounding countries celebrate the New Year and the arrival of spring with the festival of Nowruz. It has an ancient provenance, originating perhaps in prehistory at a time when mankind's closeness to nature made the passing of winter a cause of celebration in a way that we can scarcely conceive today, maybe comparable to being liberated from an oppressive enemy. For 13 days, the festival is celebrated by appreciating nature's bounty, including delicious food. We have with us a glorious array of dishes prepared by the ever-brilliant Hannah Harley-Young, creator and host of Crazy Sexy Food. How magnificent. You've been here before and you've brought marvellous things, but today you're bringing Iranian things.
Yes.
So what is your connection with Iran?
So my mother is Iranian, and I also married an Iranian, and it's a part of my heritage that I really do identify with, because there is so much beauty in the country, the history of it, our culture. I'm going to take you through all the traditions and the symbols of this special time of year, and I have this connection. I feel Iranian, and I love that.
And you learned to cook from your mother?
Oh yes, she's the reason I'm basically doing everything I do today.
Well, there are some absolutely delicious things here. No.
This is not the food. This is the food over here. But what you've sort of said, it's a 13-day celebration, and it also celebrates the spring equinox. We've come out of the darkness of winter. It's hope, it's rebirth, it's new life. And so two big things kind of start off the celebrations. One is something called the Chahas Sambe Suri, which is where people come together, families and friends, and they build a bonfire in their garden. And they jump over the bonfire. And I think it's really important to note that the bonfire is not negative, it's a positive thing. We're respecting the fire and we are getting rid of negative energy. So we're jumping over into the new year.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I'm not sure I'm quite up to that anymore. But,
Don't worry, I'm not going to make you do that today. But
yeah.
You will have to eat, which is great.
And then all these dishes here, which we're not to eat?
No, so this is called the haftzin, which if you go to any Iranian household at this time, you will see a table or a fireplace or an area where they place all of these items. Haftzin in Farsi means the 7 S's, haft meaning 7. So there are lots of symbolic and traditional things on here. I'm going to take you through some of them.
A bit of money.
So money for prosperity. Yeah. We've got here sabzi, which is the grass and the sprouts. This is for rejuvenation and new life. A candle for enlightenment. We've got goldfish for life as well. We have garlic, which is for good health. Apple for beauty. We have painted eggs, which is for fertility. We have what we call in the Western world sumac. We call it sumag, which is for the sunrise. We've got vinegar here, which is for age and patience. which I'm sure you have lots of.
How absolutely superb. So
and other various bits and pieces.
Huge amounts of symbolism.
Yes.
Now, marvellous fragrances are rising from this food.
OK, so I'm going to talk to you about this one first.
All right.
This is sort of considered the dish of New Year. This is called sabzi polo be mahi. Mahi means fish. Sabzi means herbs. The rice is cooked with a mixture of aromatic herbs. We use a lot of coriander, parsley, chives, and something called fenugreek, which I think in Indian cooking, a lot of people call it methi. That's how a lot of people know it. This is called kuku sabzi. So the word sabzi is being used a lot right now.
Yes.
This is the way that I would liken this is to like a Spanish omelette.
Yes.
Or like a tortilla. It's herbs and eggs. And then the fish. The interesting story about the fish is that if you were in Iran, we would be eating Caspian whitefish. Obviously, we're not in Iran, so we are going to... This is a sea bass.
You substitute the sea bass?
Yes, you could do sea bass or haddock.
And this is... This has a lovely yellow stain to it. What have you done to that?
OK, so that is turmeric. And as you can see also on the rice, the orange bits of rice is the infamous saffron, which is sort of...
magnificent saffron.
The magnificent saffron, which I don't know if people know, is actually more expensive than gold by weight.
I don't know how you've managed to produce this warm in the studio. That's absolutely marvellous.
I have my ways. These are not oranges. These are called naranj, which is a Persian orange. In the UK, we can't really get them, but I guess we get, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, we do get some of them over from Spain and Portugal. They are slightly bitter in taste, and this is prevalent in all the meals served at this time of the year.
What was the word you used?
Naranj.
Yes, you know the Spanish for an orange as
Is
well. Naranja.
Exactly, yes.
And of course, orange is quite close to that word as well,
Yes.
isn't it? An orange, yes.
The dish to your right is what I would consider...
Fine,
what do you think of the rice?
The
Beautiful.
rice is superb.
Yeah, it is. This is the thing with Iranian food. It's not spicy, it's fragrant. You know, we're using herbs and it's slow cooked. I always say to my friends, if someone is going to offer to cook you Iranian food, say yes, because they must love you so much. It can take days to make some of these dishes.
Yes, I've dined with Iranian friends and they take such care.
Yeah.
Now, this is what you described as being close to a Spanish omelette.
Yes.
Not the rice of it. But Spanish omelette would be yellow. This is green. Is this, again, full of herbs?
Full of herbs. Again, the same ones, sort of coriander, parsley, dill, fenugreek, some chives or some spring onions. And you just I prefer to slow cook it into like a frying pan, like a deep frying pan dish. Some people cook it in the oven. It's preference.
You use the word freshness, and that is absolutely the word to summarise it. It's all delicious. It's light. It dances on the tongue.
OK,
Now,
this is an important dish.
Is it?
This is considered the official or the unofficial dish of Iran. This is called gourmet sabzi. Again, that word sabzi. You can see this is a vivid green plate. All of these are involving herbs. Very important at this time of the year. You know, it's rebirth. We're coming into a new season, a new year. This is slow-cooked lamb in a herb stew with kidney beans. We use kidney beans over here. But the biggest part of this...
I'm just going to show those kidney beans. There they are.
And I'm going to show you this. This is the piece de resistance. That is a Persian dried lime. Now, this is the thing that will make any Iranian dish. When you buy them, you can buy them in any Iranian supermarkets. They're rock hard. You pierce them with a knife. You put them into the stew from the get-go. They soften over the slow cooking time.
Yes.
And you then, at the end, press the lines against the side of the saucepan and they release the most beautiful, fragrant juice. And this, you'll taste it now.
And so that will be all those through this lovely sauce.
You will taste that lime flavour.
I do. I think that's magnificent.
This is, I honestly think, one of the best dishes ever created.
So I've tasted the sauce with its lovely kidney beans.
And then there's some lamb in there as well,
I'll
which
just have
has
a
been
go
slow roasted.
Lamb.
Again, it's sort of preference, lamb shank, lamb shoulder. You've got such a difficult job.
I know. You have slow cooked that and you've done it absolutely to perfection. I was wondering, this goes back, we think, thousands of years.
Yes.
To prehistory. When does one appropriately use the word Persian?
Persia became Iran in the 30s.
Are they synonymous?
Persia is Iran. For me, from my personal experience and a lot of Iranian friends, Persian friends, it's really up to the individual what they prefer to use. I have a lot of friends who don't like to be called Persian. I have a lot of friends who don't mind. I consider myself Iranian, but also if you said I was Persian, I would have no problem with that. I think it really depends on the individual and sort of your relationship with the history of the country.
And tell me about what Persian people would be doing. With how many people would they be sharing this, and in what circumstances?
Oh, my gosh. I mean, the more the merrier. I think something about Persians, Iranians, is that we love to be around our family and our friends, and we're feeders. So especially at this time of the year, if you're coming over to the house, you're not coming for a cup of tea, you're coming for a whole spread. We will not let you leave until your stomach is full. And we're all about, you know, celebrating the great in life. And I think one thing to point out about Nowruz is that we are celebrating and respecting nature and food. This is not about gender, it's not about politics, it's not about religion, it's purely about celebrating the new year, new life, rejuvenation.
And Iranian people have this extraordinary culture of hospitality.
Yes.
And speaking of hospitality, I'm just going to open this bottle over here.
I'm loving all these different cultures happening today.
Well, you will be aware that this is St. Patrick's Day.
Yes.
And this is a premium Irish whiskey. And I thought that it would be appropriate to have a little toast. To wish all our Irish friends and all our Iranian friends great happiness as they celebrate their various festivals.
Absolutely.
Good health to you.
Good health.
Now, you actually are not drinking, and there's a very good reason for that, but I'm enjoying it all on my own, and thank you for joining me in spirit. So, how's your business going?
Everything is going very well. I've just been filming the 10th season of my podcast, which I don't know how I got to 10 seasons, but here we are. So we're working on that. And I also am starting to prep a lot of the food festivals that are going to be coming up from sort of May onwards. That's sort of actually my busy period this summer.
Magnificent.
Yes.
Well, every time you come here, you do something absolutely superb and delicious, but you have completely taken me by pleasant surprise today with this superb display of Iranian food. And I think I got the pronunciation wrong. It's Nowruz, is it? Nowruz?
Nowruz. I say Nowruz.
You say.
I will say one thing. I don't know if I have time, but once the celebrations are done, we tie these up. You take sprigs, you tie it up, you throw it back into the river or the water. We want to give the food back to the land.
Absolutely marvellous celebration, full of marvellous cultural references. Thank you so much, Hannah, for the spur face. Thank you very much to all my guests who have come along today. I'm so grateful when people give up their Sunday mornings and afternoons to be with me. I will be here next week, so until then, I wish you a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see you next Sunday.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, for the week ahead, it's remaining changeable across the board. For most of the week, it will be fairly mild, but towards the end of the week into the weekend, it does look like it will turn briefly colder. So for the rest of Sunday, still got low pressure generally in charge across the country. But any showers generally fizzling out as the evening goes on. So some fairly clear skies developing across England and Wales, but it doesn't last long in the west. Another band of cloud and rain beginning to work its way in. So by the end of the night, clearest of the skies out towards the east and maybe across Northern Ireland. And for all of us, it is going to be a mild one. Temperatures not falling much lower than 5 to 7 degrees. So into Monday morning, a bright start in the east, but the cloud and rain across central parts will move its way eastwards as the day goes on. Behind it, some drier and brighter weather for a time. This transfers towards the east into the afternoon, and that allows another band of cloud and rain to work its way in from the west. So quite a wet end to the day for Northern Ireland, but for many, another mild day, temperatures up to 17 degrees in the southeast.